Topping today's news, an update from the Office of the Prime Minister on Shanty Town demolitions. The F&M leader and chairman facing a lawsuit by one of the party's vice chairmen. The government looks set to make a decision on the proposed NIB rate increase, and the United States Embassy relaunching Overseas Security Advisory Council. Good evening, Bahamas. I'm Jarino Saunders. This is your JCN Evening News. It's a pleasure to have you join us. As the demolition of shanty towns continued to be a hot topic following the lifting of the Shantytown injunction a month ago, the government has still not given a timeline to start those demolitions. During the weekly press briefing at the Office of the Prime Minister today, when asked for an update as to when the government will move forward with its promise to demolish the unregulated communities, Press Secretary in the Office of the Prime Minister, Clint Watson, says Prime Minister Philip Davis wants the public to know that the government is taking a meticulous approach to this process.
Efforts, however, have been engaged to identify documented residents in shanty towns. Documented residents. Now, once you've identified those documented residents in shanty towns, we will be able to identify their employers, who obviously they have work permits for. The employers will be made to live up to their living obligations for their employer who is on work permit. If they do not live up to those obligations, the work permits will be revoked and the individuals repatriated. That's for documented. For those who are undocumented, they will be processed for repatriation. And then to the third category, which are Bahamians who are living in these communities, the government will assist in finding relocation places for those Bahamians that are living there. Those are the three categories that you will find in shanty towns. So there is a methodic plan that is in place that is now dealing with this to identify that before the demolition process can take place. And that
when asked for a timeline of these assessments, Mr. Watson says there is none, but assures the public that the process is currently ongoing by the Shantytown Committee. That includes the Minister of Immigration and the Minister responsible for Public Works and Utilities. As it relates to the global economic outlook, Minister of Economic Affairs, Senator Michael Halkitis, while speaking in the Senate today, described to fellow senators the Bahamas' domestic economic outlook and some of the work being done by the government.
As you know, as a small island country, most of what we consume being imported, it is difficult to consider current and future prospects without reference to the performance of global economies. And so, Mr. President, in its January 2023 update to its World Economic Outlook, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, estimated real output growth for the global economy at 3.4%. While this level of economic growth represents an increase from the estimated 2.9% growth experienced in 2019 before the COVID-19 pandemic, it still remains below the average real growth of 3.8% that had been occurring globally over the previous 20 years. We know that the growth of the economy in 2022 was constrained by several factors. These include a global average inflation rate of 8.8%.
Minister Halkitis goes on to explain that increases in interest rates came as central banks around the world raised their rates in an effort to combat inflation. This in addition to supply chain disruptions, lingering global impacts affecting economics around the world.
When we talk about the performance of the global economy, the continued restrictions in China, which have been loosened up, but for which some still remain. Know that our major trading partner is the United States, and so as goes their economy, so goes the economy of the Bahamas. And so U.S. macroeconomic factors will always affect the Bahamas. And so the IMF for 2022 conservatively estimates real output growth for the U.S. economy at 2%. And nominal inflation remains high second half of the year, but the inflation rate for the year to December was at about 6.5% compared to 7% for the previous period. So it's tempering, coming down, but it remains high.
Senator Halkitis goes on to echo the sentiments of the Deputy Prime Minister, Chester Cooper, who says the Bahamas, or the Bahamian economy, continues to get stronger, led by the tourism industry. It may not be what many in the country want to hear, but again, Miles LaRota, Minister with responsibility for the National Insurance Board, NIB, continues to hammer home the fact that NIB contributions must increase to prevent a collapse of the social safety network that is expected to lose $98 million, according to Mr. LaRota. We hear more from his contribution in this next report. Minister Miles LaRota, who has responsibility for the National Insurance Board, says the board has not turned a profit in many years, and payments of benefits continue to outweigh contributions by millions of dollars, which is unsustainable. To drive home his point even further, Minister LaRota used his time on the final day of the mid-year budget debate in Parliament on Monday to point out that former government officials from both sides of the aisle agree that something has to be done to prevent a total collapse of NIB.
Mr. Anton Sanders, we all know that he's a former employee and chairman. He's in the insurance industry. And he has given me permission to go on the record to say that, yes, there need to be a unified approach to this. But he also recognizes that while he was chairman, that those discussions were being held. I then spoke to Mr. Patrick Ward, another former chairman. And I just want to put on the record, Anton Sanders was an F&M chairman of the National Insurance Board. And so was Pat Ward, who has also given me permission to call his name with regards to the need for rate increase and other recommendations to better put national insurance in a position to be that safety net for individuals who would have paid into the program and at their retirement age be able to receive their benefits. Numbers speak for themselves, and we can kick back and forth, and we can make mention that the government is just unfairly putting this tax burden when we all know, on this side and that side, that there are some fundamental changes that needs to be made.
Minister LaRota said NIB former Director Algernon Cargill is also of the opinion that there needs to be an increase in the contribution rates. He said consecutive actuarial reviews relating to NIB shows that there are some things that are no one's fault, like people living longer while receiving benefits, while at the same time there are fewer Bahamians paying into the program. He says we cannot kick the can down the road anymore. He shared some projections he described as startling.
For the year ended December 2022, contributions totaled around $280 million, while benefits expenditures totaled $355 million, a shortfall of some $78 million. The NIB budget for 2023 has projected that benefits will exceed contributions by $86 million and projects total income to be $358 million, with total expenditures of $456 million, resulting in a deficit of $98 million. As these numbers are not sustainable over the near term, the time to act is now.
Minister LaRota says in addition to the increase in rates, greater compliance by employers is what is required.
Greater compliance among employers is the clarion call. For 2023, a goal to collect some $300 million in contribution payments has been set, with an expectation that the domestic economy will continue its reopening momentum, with the pandemic numbers and various restrictions seemingly in the rearview. The NIB Compliance Department continues with concerted efforts to provide avenues to make doing business with NIB easier. Mr. Deputy, we have recruited in January of 2023 some 20 new inspectors, roughly between New Providence and the Family Islands, Given the increased economic and rebuilding activity occurring in New Providence and the various family islands, this improved coverage should be a solid support base in improving employer compliance across the entire Bahamas.
Minister LaRota also challenged employees to know your NIB status and check to see that your present and former employers have made contributions on your behalf. As he wrapped up his contribution, Minister LaRota again rejected accusations by the opposition that he is at odds with the Prime Minister over the proposed NIB rate increase. He reminded opposition members those are not fights won by a Minister of State. Minister LaRota said on Wednesday that the government has made a decision on the proposed NIB increase based on recommendations it has received thus far. In what seems to be an official opposition F&M laden with conflict, a Supreme Court justice has granted an injunction against F&M leader Michael Pintard and the party's chairman, Dr. Dwayne Sands, following the filing of legal action late last year by F&M Vice Chairman Richard Johnson, also known in the social media world as Facts and Issues. Mr. Johnson was suspended from attending F&M council meetings last October, and in November, a writ of summons was filed as he sued Mr. Pintard and Dr. Sands, claiming the ban violated the F&M's constitution. In a March 5th ruling, Justice Deborah Fraser ruled that both Mr. Pintard and Dr. Sands are hereby restrained from prohibiting and interfering with Mr. Johnson as he carries out his duties as F&M Vice Chairman, including but not limited to attendance and participation in all Executive Committee and Central Council meetings. Mr. Johnson is seeking $500,000 in compensation for general damages and mental stress concerning the suspension, which stems from allegations that he acted contrary to the interests of the F&M party, its platform, and its policies. Justice Fraser has ruled that costs are reserved pending the determination of the action. On Monday, the U.S. Embassy, in partnership with co-chair Atlantis, relaunched the Bahamas chapter of the Overseas Security Advisory Council, or OSAC. The Security Advisory Council, which is open to all, provides its members from across a range of sectors, including tourism, education, business, religion, with the security, intelligence, and professional network needed to manage risk and cope with any emerging security threats. The Bahamas chapter was dormant for nearly 3 years due to the COVID-19 pandemic. U.S. Chargé d'Affaires Usha Pitts is joyful to see the return of OSAC. Jason Crosby, U.S. Embassy's Regional Security Officer, ensures the Overseas Security Advisory Council receives support from the U.S. Embassy. He shares why OSAC is so very important.
What's great about OSAC is that it's just not the U.S. government feeding information to our non-governmental or to our private sector partners. That's not what OSAC's about. OSAC is what I would call a multifaceted organization or group where we call upon experts across the security spectrum. Now, for instance, we have Stephen Sweeting here today, who's agreed to be our OSAC Bahamian country chapter here. And for instance, if he sees fraud trends or crime trends that might help the group, such as with American Airlines or Carnival Cruise Lines, then that's how we become better, more safer groups and organizations.
Atlantis Executive Director Stephen Sweeting, who heads the Bahamas chapter of OSAC, praised the chapter for providing rare opportunities to meet like-minded individuals from different disciplines.
Working or being a part of this chapter, the chapter has provided us with a unique opportunity to meet with like-minded individuals and persons from different disciplines. So I didn't just get the opportunity to liaise and discuss with security professionals or hotel professionals. I also got the opportunity to meet with persons from the airline industries. I also got the opportunity to meet with people from faith-based organizations. So we got some unique opportunities to discuss some things that would not normally come to the table when you're talking about security professionals speaking. Additionally, I'd like to say that we had some really interesting speakers that came down, and we did some unique training and had some good opportunities to learn from that. So the chapter has provided us with a number of unique experiences that without them, well, I don't know that we would have gotten it.
Douglas Hanna, Senior Atlantis Vice President of Security and Surveillance, said with thousands of tourists visiting and vacationing at Atlantis each year, the information sharing through OSAC is a vital tool in their security program. If you are interested in joining OSAC, please reach out to the U.S. Embassy's security team or visit OSAC's website at www.osac.gov for more information. And finally, in this segment, it was a sad day for family, friends, and other well-wishers as they said goodbye to an iconic businessman, the late George Myers. During the state-recognized memorial service held this morning at Christ Church Cathedral, Michelle Myers Main, niece of the tourism guru, gave a heartfelt tribute to the man she says shaped her into who she is today.
Paralleled with the rapid rise of his personal career and all his successes, he welcomed us 3 young children from our parents in Jamaica without any hesitation. Although younger than my siblings, the memories of that time will never be forgotten. It was, however, with the passing of our father, his brother Anthony, over 30 years ago, that the UG relationship really took on so much more. Our overly spoiling, short-tempered, fun-loving, hard-working, know-it-all, stern but adoring uncle became even more to us. More of a protector, more of our teacher, our father figure, our greatest fan, our mentor, our biggest supporter, and most of all, our friend.
Former Minister of Tourism Vincent Vanderpool Wallace reminisced on their journey spent together in tourism.
Thus began his unique position among my mentors. George was not merely one of my mentors, he became my eternal tormentor. I made a mistake decades ago telling him I hated the name Vinny. Well, that made me Vinny forever. So I learned to like it. It was his assistant, my fellow tormented Sonia Dames, who told me from the beginning that George only raised his voice with people he believed had much to offer, and that was his way of continuing to challenge them. Now you understand why we all stood there with smiles on our faces whenever he was yelling at something we had done or failed to do. That meant we mattered.
Mr. Myers was a businessman in the Bahamas, credited with playing a major part in the development of Paradise Island into a premier tourism destination. In remembering Mr. Myers' impactful legacy, Prime Minister Philip Davis and former Prime Minister Hubert Ingraham spoke to his contribution to nation building.
George fell in love with the Bahamas, and we in the Bahamas loved him back. And together, we benefited. Later, George became the go-to man in Bahamas tourism and a very successful businessman. Indeed, his name is writ large in the annals of Bahamian tourism.
George Myers was not a prime minister or even a politician, but he had the air of successive prime ministers, as you would have heard, who sought his counsel on any number of issues and utilized his enormous skills, knowledge, talents on any number of projects. His sage advice informed public policy on tourism in no small way, and given our pride of place on a global tourism landscape, I can say with surety that his advisements were indeed sage.
Mr. Myers was Executive Vice President of the Resorts International from 1977 to 1992. He served in the past as President of the Bahamas Hotel Employers Association, the Bahamas Hotel Association, and the Caribbean Hotel Association. He was also the recipient of the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce Lifetime Achievement Award in 2009, and most recently awarded the country's highest honor, the Order of the Bahamas, in 2022. We'll take a break here. We'll be right back after these commercials.